The Letter. Mr. Hercule Poirot, you think you are very clever at solving mysteries that are too difficult for our poor, stupid British police. My name is Captain Arthur Hastings. My wife and I have a large farm in South America. But before I was married, I lived in London. There I helped my friend, the famous Belgian detective Hercule Poirot, solve many crimes. Poirot used to work with the police in Belgium, but he retired several years ago. Since retiring, though, he has become a very successful private detective. When the British police have a difficult crime which they cannot solve, they often ask Poirot to help them. In June 1935, I came back to Britain for 6 months on business, while my wife stayed in South America to manage the farm. I didn't know that during that time I was going to work with my old friend Poirot again. Most of this story is my own personal experience. Sometimes, though, I have included information about events when I was not present myself. But I believe I have described the thoughts and feelings of the other people in the story correctly. Poirot has seen my work and agrees that I have. In my opinion, Poirot used his skills in a most clever and unusual way to solve a number of crimes which were different from any others that he had worked on. I shall call these crimes the ABC murders. After arriving in England, I went almost immediately to visit Poirot. He had moved to a new flat in London and was very pleased to see me. "You're looking wonderful, Poirot," I said. "You haven't aged at all. In fact, if it were possible, I would say that you have fewer grey hairs than the last time I saw you." Poirot smiled. "And why is that not possible? It is quite true." "Do you mean your hair is turning from grey to black, instead of from black to grey?" I said in surprise. "That's very strange. It seems against nature." "As usual, Hastings," said Poirot, "you have a beautiful and unsuspicious mind. You have not changed over the years. You notice a strange fact and explain it in the same breath without noticing that you are doing so." Poirot walked into his bedroom and returned with a bottle in his hand. I looked at it, then I understood. It was a bottle of black hair colouring. "Poirot!" I cried. "You've coloured your hair!" "Ah, you begin to understand," said Poirot. "I suppose next time I come home I shall find you wearing a false moustache. Or are you wearing one now?" Poirot looked shocked. He has a large black moustache, which he is very proud of. "No, no, mon ami. A false moustache? Ah, how horrible!" He pulled his moustache to prove to me that it was real. I have never seen a moustache like mine in the whole of London. That was a very good thing, I thought privately. But I didn't want to hurt Poirot's feelings, so instead I changed the subject. "Are you still working?" I asked. "I know you actually retired years ago." "Yes, it is true," replied Poirot. "I tried to grow vegetables instead. But immediately a murder happened, and I had to forget about the vegetables. And since then, whenever I say that a case will be my last, it is not. Each time I say, this is the end. But then something else happens. But I must say, my friend, that I do not like retirement at all. If I do not use my brain, it will stop working." "I see," I said. "So you still use your brain sometimes?" "Exactly. But I choose my cases very carefully. You know, Hastings, in many ways, I think you bring me luck." "Really?" I said. "In what ways?" "As soon as I heard you were coming, I said to myself, something will happen. Hastings and I will hunt criminals again together, just like the old days. But if so, it must not be ordinary business. It must be something—" He waved his hands excitedly. "Something very fine and special." "Well," I said at last, smiling, "has this excellent crime happened yet?" "Pas encore. At least—" Poirot paused, and a look of worry came over his face. His voice sounded so strange that I looked at him in surprise. Suddenly, he crossed the room to a desk near the window. There were papers arranged carefully inside. He took one out, then passed it to me. "Tell me, mon ami," he said, "what do you think of this?" I took it from him with interest. It was a letter which had been typed on thick white notepaper. "Mr. Hercule Poirot, you think you are very clever at solving mysteries that are too difficult for our poor, stupid British police. Let us see, Mr. Clever Poirot, just how clever you can be. Perhaps you'll find this problem too difficult. Watch out for Andover on the 21st of the month. Yours, A.B.C." I looked at the envelope. The address was typed too. "The postmark is London, WC1, said Poirot. "Well, what is your opinion?" I handed the letter back to him. "It's from a madman, I suppose," I said. "That is all you can say?" "Well, doesn't it sound like a madman to you?" "Yes, my friend, it does." His voice was serious. I looked at him in surprise. "You're worried, Poirot." "A madman, mon ami, is a serious matter. A madman is a very dangerous thing. Yes, of course, that's true. I hadn't thought about that, but it sounds more like a rather stupid kind of joke. Perhaps the sender was drunk. You may be right, Hastings. What have you done about it? I asked. What can one do? I showed the letter to our good friend, Chief Inspector Japp. He thought the same as you, that it was a stupid joke. They get letters like these every day at Scotland Yard. I too have received them before, but there is something about that letter, Hastings, that I do not like. Poirot shook his head. Then he picked up the letter and put it in the desk. If you really think it's serious, can't you do something? I asked. As always, you are a man who wants action. But what can we do? The police have seen the letter, but they too will do nothing. There are no fingerprints on it. There are no clues to the possible writer. In fact, there is only your own feeling. Not feeling, Hastings. Feeling is a bad word. It is my knowledge, my experience that tells me something about that letter is wrong. He waved his hands about, then shook his head again. Well, I said, the 21st is Friday. If a big robbery happens near Andover, then... Ah, what a good thing that would be. A good thing? I stared in surprise. The word seemed to be a very strange one to use. A robbery may be exciting, but surely it can't be a good thing. Poirot shook his head. You don't understand, my friend. It would be a good thing because it would clear my mind of the fear of something else. Of what? Murder, said Hercule Poirot. Mr. Alexander Bonaparte Cust got up from his chair and looked near-sightedly round his bedroom. The furniture was old, and the bedroom was not very clean. His back hurt from sitting in the same position for too long. As he stretched himself to his full height, you could see that he was quite a tall man, but he did not look tall because he stooped. He went to a coat that was hanging on the back of the door, and took from the pocket a packet of cheap cigarettes and some matches. He lit a cigarette, and then returned to the table. He picked up a railway guide and searched for some information inside it. Then he looked at a typewritten list of names. With a pen, he made a mark against one of the first names on the list. It was Thursday, the 20th of June. I had forgotten about the anonymous letter which Poirot had received, and the importance of the 21st. On the 22nd, Poirot received a visit from Chief Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard. We had known the inspector for many years, and he welcomed me warmly. "What a surprise!" he cried. It's just like the old days seeing you with Monsieur Poirot again. You're looking well, too. Your hair is just getting a little thin. Well, that's what happens to all of us. I always brushed my hair carefully across the top of my head, so I wasn't very pleased that Inspector Japp had noticed my thinning hair, but I decided not to get upset. Yes, we're all getting older, I agreed. Except for Monsieur Poirot, said Japp, smiling at my friend. His hair and moustache look wonderful, and since he retired, he's become very famous. Train mysteries, air mysteries, high society deaths. Oh, he's here, there and everywhere. Have you heard about his anonymous letter? I showed it to Hastings the other day, said Poirot. Of course, I said. I'd completely forgotten about it. What was the date in the letter? Yesterday, said Japp. That's why I've come here. I rang the police in Andover to see if anything had happened. But the letter is certainly a joke. A shop window was broken by children throwing stones, and a few people got drunk. But that's all. I am very glad about that, said Poirot. We get lots of letters like that every day, said Japp, from people who have nothing better to do. They don't mean any harm. They're just looking for a bit of excitement. I have been foolish to think that the matter was so serious, Poirot agreed. Well, I must go, said Japp, laughing. I just wanted to stop you worrying. After the inspector had left, Poirot said, He does not change much, the good Japp, eh? He looks much older, I said, and his hair is going grey, I added nastily. You know, Hastings, I have a very clever hairdresser, said Poirot. He could put some false hair onto your head and brush your own hair over it. Poirot, I shouted. I'm not interested in your hairdresser. What's the matter with the top of my head? Nothing at all, said Poirot quickly. Well, I said, feeling a little calmer, I'm sorry that anonymous letter didn't lead to an interesting crime. Yes, I was wrong about that, said Poirot. I am too suspicious. The telephone rang, and Poirot got up to answer it. Allô? He said. Yes, it is Hercule Poirot speaking. He listened for a minute or two, and then I saw his face change. Mais oui. Yes, we will come naturally. It may be as you say. Yes, I will bring it. À tout à l'heure, then. He put down the phone and came across the room to me. That was Japp speaking, Hastings. He had just got back to Scotland Yard. There was a message from Andover. Andover? I cried excitedly. Poirot said slowly, "An old woman has been found murdered. She had a little tobacco and newspaper shop. Her name is Asher." I think I felt a little disappointed. I had expected something very unusual. The murder of a shopkeeper didn't sound very interesting. Poirot continued in the same serious voice. "The Andover police believe they know who did it. It seems that the woman's husband gets drunk and behaves badly. He has said several times that he would kill her. But the police would like to have another look at the anonymous letter I received. So I have said that you and I will go down to Andover at once." I felt a little more excited. Perhaps the murder of the old woman wasn't very interesting, but it was still a crime. It had been a long time since I had mixed with crime and criminals. I wasn't really listening to Poirot's next words, but later I remembered them very clearly. "This is the beginning," said Hercule Poirot. Chapter 2. A Visit to Andover. A strange feeling came over me as I looked down on that old face and thin grey hair. She looked so peaceful, so distanced from any violent event. We were met at Andover by Inspector Glenn, a tall, fair-haired man with a pleasant smile. He gave us the facts about the case. The crime was discovered by Police Constable Dover at 1 a.m. on the morning of the 22nd. He noticed that the door of the shop wasn't locked. He entered, and at first he thought that the place was empty. But when he shone a light over the counter, he saw the body of the old woman. When the police doctor arrived, it was found that the woman had been hit hard on the back of the head. The doctor said that she had probably died about 7 to 9 hours earlier. But we found a man who went in and bought some tobacco at 5:30, said Inspector Glenn. And a second man went in and found the shop empty at 5 minutes past 6. So that puts the time of death at between 5:30 and 6:05. We haven't been able to find anyone yet who saw Asher, the woman's husband, near the shop at the time. But he was in a pub at 9 o'clock and was very drunk. He's not a very pleasant kind of man. "He didn't live with his wife?" asked Poirot. "No, they separated some years ago. Asher's German. He was a waiter at one time, but he started drinking. After that, nobody wanted to employ him. His wife worked as a cook-housekeeper to an old lady. When the woman died, she left Mrs. Asher some money, and Mrs. Asher started this tobacco and newspaper business. Asher used to come round and cause problems for her, so she gave him a small amount of money every week to make him go away." Had they any children? Asked Poirot. No, there's a niece. She's working as a maid near Overton. And you say that this man Asher used to threaten his wife? That's right. He was terrible when he was drunk, threatening to kill her. Was anything missing from the shop? Asked Poirot. Nothing. No money was taken. No signs of robbery. You think that this man Asher came into the shop drunk, started threatening his wife, and finally struck her down? It seems the most likely solution, said the inspector. But I'd like to have another look at that letter you received. I was wondering if Asher wrote it. Poirot handed over the letter, and the inspector read it. I don't think it's from Asher, he said at last. I don't think that he would use the words "our British police." It's good quality paper, too. It's strange that the letter should say the 21st of the month. Of course, it might be coincidence. That is possible, yes, said Poirot. But I don't like this kind of coincidence, Mr. Poirot. ABC. Who could ABC be? We'll see if Mary Drower, that's Mrs. Asher's niece, can give us any help. It's a strange business. A constable came in. Yes, Briggs, what is it? It's the man Asher, sir. We've found him. Right. Bring him in here. Where was he? Hiding down by the railway. Franz Asher was a very unattractive man. He was crying and threatening us at the same time. He looked at each of our faces in turn. What do you want with me? You should be ashamed to bring me here. You are pigs. How dare you do this? His voice changed suddenly. No, I do not mean that. You would not hurt a poor old man, not be hard on him. Everyone is hard on poor old Franz. Poor old Franz. Mr. Asher started to cry. Stop that, Asher, said the inspector. Control yourself. You're not in any trouble yet. If you didn't kill your wife... Asher interrupted him, his voice almost a scream. I did not kill her. I did not kill her. It is all lies. You are English pigs. All against me. I would never kill her. Never. You often threatened to kill her, Asher? No, you do not understand. That was just a joke between Alice and me. A strange kind of joke. Where were you yesterday evening, Asher? I did not go near Alice. I was with friends, good friends. We were drinking at the Seven Stars and then at the Red Dog. Dick Willows, he was with me, and old Curdy, and George, and Platt. It is the truth that I am telling you. Take him away, Inspector Glenn said to Constable Briggs. Hold him on suspicion of murder. I don't know what to think, he said as the unpleasant, shaking old man was taken out. If the letter didn't exist, I'd say he did it. What about the men he talked about? Asked Poirot. A bad crowd, all ready to tell lies. But it's important to find out whether anyone saw him near the shop between 5:30 and 6. Poirot shook his head thoughtfully. You are sure nothing was taken from the shop? He asked. Perhaps a packet or two of cigarettes, but that's not a reason for murder. And there was nothing different about the shop? Nothing new there? There was a railway guide, said the inspector. It was open and turned face down on the counter. It appeared that someone had looked up the trains from Andover, either the old woman or a customer. Did she sell that type of thing? Asked Poirot. The inspector shook his head. She sold cheap timetables. This was a big one, the kind of guide that only a big shop would sell. A light came into Poirot's eyes. He bent forward. A railway guide, you say? What kind? Was it an ABC? Yes, said the inspector. It was an ABC. Until that moment, I had not felt very interested in the case. The murder of an old woman in a small back-street shop was a very ordinary type of crime. I had thought that the date of the 21st in the anonymous letter was just a coincidence. Mrs. Asher, I felt sure, had been murdered by her husband. But now, when I heard about the railway guide, I felt a small shock of excitement. Surely this could not be a second coincidence. The ordinary crime was turning into something very unusual. We left the police station and went to the building where the body of the dead woman was being kept. A strange feeling came over me as I looked down on that old face and thin grey hair. She looked so peaceful, so distanced from any violent event. She was beautiful when she was young, said Poirot. Really? I said. But yes. Look at the lines of the bones, the shape of the head. We went to see the police doctor, Dr. Kerr. We haven't found what killed her, he said. It's impossible to say what it was. Perhaps a heavy stick. Did the murderer have to be very strong? Asked Poirot. Do you mean, could the killer be a shaky old man of 70? Oh, yes, it's possible, if there was enough weight in the head of the stick. Then the murderer could be a man or a woman. The doctor looked surprised. A woman, eh? I hadn't thought of connecting a woman with this type of crime, but of course it's possible. Poirot nodded in agreement. How was the body lying? He asked. In my opinion, Mrs. Usher was standing with her back to the counter. The murderer hit her on the back of the head, and she fell down behind the counter. So she couldn't be seen by anybody entering the shop. We thanked Dr. Kerr and left. You see, Hastings, said Poirot, this shows that Usher may be innocent. A woman faces a man who is threatening her, but instead she had her back to the murderer. So clearly she was taking down tobacco or cigarettes for a customer. Poirot looked at his watch. Overton is not far away. Shall we drive over there and have an interview with the niece of the dead woman? A few minutes later, we were driving towards Overton. Inspector Glenn had given us the address of Mrs. Asher's niece. It was a big house, about 1.5 kilometres from the village, on the London side. The door was opened by a pretty, dark-haired girl. Her eyes were red from crying. I think you are Miss Mary Drower, the maid here? Asked Poirot gently. Yes, sir. That's right. I'm Mary, sir. Then perhaps I can talk to you for a few minutes. It's about your aunt. We went inside the house, and Mary opened the door of a small living room. We entered, and Poirot sat down on a chair by the window. He looked up into the girl's face, studying it closely. You have heard of your aunt's death, of course? The girl nodded, tears filling her eyes again. This morning, sir, the police came here. Oh, it's terrible. Poor auntie. You are fond of your aunt, Mary? Said Poirot gently. Very, sir. She was always very good to me. I usually visited auntie on my free day. She had a lot of trouble with her husband. Tell me, Mary, did he threaten her? Oh, yes, sir. He used to say he would cut her throat and things like that. So you are not very surprised when you learned what had happened? Oh, but I was, Mary replied. You see, sir, I never thought that he meant it. And auntie wasn't afraid of him. He was afraid of her. Ah, said Poirot. So, supposing someone else killed her, have you any idea who that person could be? I've no idea, sir, said Mary in great surprise. It doesn't seem likely. There was no one that your aunt was afraid of? Mary shook her head. Auntie wasn't afraid of people. Did she ever get anonymous letters? Letters that weren't signed, or were only signed with letters like A, B, C? Mary shook her head in surprise. Poirot got up. If I want you at any time, Mary, I will write to you here. Actually, sir, I'm going to leave this job. I don't like the country. I stayed here to be near my aunt. But now... Her eyes filled with tears again. There's no reason for me to stay, so I'll go back to London. When you do go to London, will you give me your address? Poirot handed her his card. Mary looked at the card in surprise. Then you're not a policeman, sir? I am a private detective. She stood there looking at him for some moments in silence. Is there anything strange happening, sir? Yes, my child, replied Poirot. There is something strange happening. Later you may be able to help me. I'll do anything, sir. It isn't right, sir. Auntie being killed. It was a strange way to describe her aunt's death, but I felt full of pity. A few moments later, we were driving back to Andover.